archipelago became deserted and cut off from the rest of the world, at least for as long as winter lasted. In 1873, barely 60 native inhabitants lived out there year-round. Of the islands, 9 in all, only 3 were inhabited, sustained by a supply boat making periodic runs from the mainland. More often, the fishermen themselves would sail the 10 miles to shore. This could take up to 2 hours in good weather, but if the head tide and winds weren't right, it could take most of a day. Rowing to and from the mainland was not common. Few would attempt the crossing in a rowboat in the dead of winter and under harsh conditions, but for one man, a killer whose motives and actions defied logic, who viciously murdered 2 innocent women alone that night on one of the islands. The Norwegian inhabitants, called Shoalers by those who lived on the mainland, were peaceful, kind, and gentle, admired and respected by those who knew them. In 1873 they were witnessing the end of one era and the beginning of another, as cod fishing became an increasingly difficult way to make a living. Few were successful at it, since that area of the Atlantic, north to Newfoundland, had been overfished for years by commercial boats from Europe as well as local fishermen. The demise of one industry, however, saw the beginning of another. Men like Tom Layton and John Poor, of Stickney and Poor Spices, recognized good investment opportunities in something other than fishing. After the Civil War they built large hotels, among the first on the Atlantic coast, and the islands emerged as a place of summer vacation resorts for the well-to-do. The Atlantic House, the Appledore House, and the Oceanic were either open for business or under construction in 1873, providing first-class accommodations to those who could afford that privilege. It was a time of change. Contrasts were stark between struggling fishermen and the splendor of Victorian-style hotels, whose celebrity guests presaged an end to a way of life. In addition to wealthy vacationers, the islands in 1873 were inhabited by temporary construction workers known to the fishermen and their families. The vibrancy of summer surrendered quickly to the bleakness, cold, and desolation of winter, when gale winds could reach near hurricane force. Permanent residents endured what shoalers before them were forced to accept, an unforgiving way of life. They would hunker down to await the arrival of spring. Winter meant 4 to 5 months of punishing existence in near isolation. A confluence of events, beginning on March 5th, resulted in the murders of 2 women who were island inhabitants. The crime brought national attention to the small community. By midday of Thursday the 6th, word reached Portsmouth police that an atrocity had happened on one of the islands, Smutty Nose. A group of fishermen from the Isles, stunned with disbelief and rambling in heavily accented English, broke the news to authorities. 2 of their own had been savagely murdered overnight. The killer could still be out there on the small cluster of islands, or he had somehow made it back to Portsmouth in a dory on a very cold night. He had to be caught. And what's more, they knew who did it. Police Chief Thomas Entwistle calmed the men down and slowly began to piece their story together. Chapter 1. March 5th, 1873, Smutty Nose Island, Maine. It wasn't that there was anything unusual about that day, except for the biting cold that arrived in mid-afternoon, bringing wind that stirred a noticeable chop and whitecaps to the sea. Even that wasn't unusual if you lived 10 miles off the Maine coast in early March. It was just another day with the same work routine: hooks to be baited, lobster traps to be checked, boats to be repaired. That was everyday life on the coastal waters of New England. March 5th, however, would prove anything but routine because of events that were about to unfold. As the day progressed into early evening and the workday ended, there was nothing out of the ordinary that might be a harbinger of those events. Now the last rays of light dimmed on the horizon as night fell on the shoreline towns, and also on a tiny island situated almost directly on the imaginary line in the ocean dividing Maine from New Hampshire. Resting on a granite rise, a weather-beaten red house stood in dark silhouette against a fading sky, its outline broken only by the yellow glow from a window.